Hi, boys and girls. It's Spot here, your mystery dog. I'm going to give you some intel about the teacher who is reading today. Number 1. The teacher was born in Indiana. Number 2. She majored in drama, which means she studied drama in college. Number 3. She loves logic puzzles. Do you think you know who it is?
Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Gershow, and did you guess it was me? Did you guess it? Did you figure out the mystery reader? I'm going to start a book called The Boy Who Loved Math, The Improbable Life of Paul Erdos by Deborah Heiligemann, I hope I said that right, and pictures by Lian Pham. There once was a boy who loved math. He grew up to be one of the greatest mathematicians who ever lived. But it all started with a big problem. Paul Erdos lived in Budapest, Hungary, with his mama, and Mama loved Paul to infinity. And Paul loved Mama to infinity too. When he was 3, he had to go back to work. Mama had to go back to work as a math teacher. She didn't want anything bad to happen to Paul, so she left him with one person she knew that would take very good care of him. She left him with, and so there's the picture, and there's a lot of used numbers on those pages, infinity and 3 and 1. She left him with Fraulein. Fraulein had too many rules. That was the problem. Paul hated rules. He hated to be told when to sit still, when to eat, and when to go to sleep. What could Paul do? He couldn't exactly solve the problem, but Paul knew that when summer came, Mama would be home with him all day, 100% of the time. So he taught himself to count really high, and then he figured out how many days it would be until summer vacation. It made him feel much better to know the number. So Paul kept counting and thinking about numbers, and one day when he was 4, Paul asked a visitor when her birthday was, and she told him. "What year were you born?" he asked, and she told him. "What time?" and she told him. Paul thought for a moment, and then he told her how many seconds she'd been alive. 1,900,152,358 seconds. Paul liked that trick, and he did it often. Paul played with numbers. He added them together and he subtracted them. And one day he subtracted a bigger number from a smaller number. The answer was less than 0. How could a number be less than 0? Mama told him numbers below 0 are called negative numbers. Paul thought that was so cool, and now he knew for sure he wanted to be a mathematician when he grew up. But first, he had to tackle another big number. School! Mama sent him to school, of course when it was time, but Paul and school were not a good match. Paul could not sit still for long, so he got up and he ran around the classroom. But that was against the rules. Oh, how Paul hated rules. How could he solve this problem? Paul told Mama he didn't want to go to school anymore, not even for one day, for 0 days. He wished he could take the days away, negative school days. He pleaded with Mama to stay home. Luckily, Mama was a worrier, and she worried about germs a lot, and she worried Paul could catch dangerous germs from children at school, so she helped him solve his problem. She said he could stay home with Fraulein. But even Fraulein was better than school. Maybe 500 times better. Fraulein and Mama did everything for Paul. They cut his meat, they buttered his bread, they got him dressed, and they tied his shoes. That was great. It meant Paul could think about numbers all day long. Numbers were his best friend, and he could always depend on numbers to be there and behave in the same way. Numbers followed rules, and he didn't like rules in life, but he liked rules in numbers. And so Paul turned 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then when Paul turned 10, he fell in love with prime numbers. Prime numbers are special. They can't be divided evenly. A prime number can be divided only by itself and 1. And the first prime number is 2. And that's the only even prime number. And all the other prime numbers are odd. And the numbers 3, 5, and 7 are prime. But not all odd numbers are prime. 9 isn't prime because you can multiply 3 times 3 is 9. Paul had a lot of questions about prime numbers. Do they go on forever? Is there a pattern to them? Why is it they go higher up, farther apart the prime numbers are? Paul loved to think about prime numbers. You can see he made a big mess on his walls. When he got older, Paul wanted to go to high school. He liked school a million times better now. He made friends and people his age who loved math and were really good at it. Paul and his friends did math together all over Budapest, but Paul was the best. He loved being the top in math, at the top of towers and mountains and buildings too. He thought about math wherever he was at and whatever he was doing. By the time Paul was 20, he was already famous around the world for his math. People called him the magician from Budapest. But he still didn't know how to do his laundry, cook his food, or butter his bread. But that was not a problem because he still lived at home and Mama still did everything for him. When Paul was 21, some mathematicians invited him to go to England to work on his math. Could he survive the world on his own? He rode the train by himself. He met the mathematicians that went to dinner. Everybody else talked and ate, but Paul stared at his bread. He stared at his butter. He still didn't know how to butter his bread. Finally, he took his knife, he put some butter on it, and he spread it on his bread. Phew! He did it. It wasn't so hard, he said. Even though he could now butter his own bread, Paul soon realized he didn't fit in the world in a regular way. He wasn't the kind of person to cook or clean or drive the car or have a wife and children. He wasn't the kind of person to live in one place and have one job. He was the kind of person to do math all of the time, but he still didn't like to follow rules, and so he invented his own way to live. Here's what he did. Paul would get on an airplane with 2 small suitcases filled with everything he owned, a few clothes, and some math notebooks. He might have $20 in his pocket or less, and he'd fly to New York and to Indiana and to Los Angeles, and he flew all over the world, from Toronto to Australia. I have no home, he declared. The world is my home. And wherever he went, wherever he got there, the same thing would happen. There he is, flying all over the world with his suitcase. A mathematician would meet him, take him home. The mathematician and Paul worked on math, and they played with the mathematician's epsilons. That's what Paul called children, because an epsilon is a very small amount in math. And just as Mama had done, friends all over the world took care of Paul. They did his laundry, they cooked his food, they cut open his grapefruit. Now, Paul wasn't the easiest house guest. Oh, and they paid his bills. He made messes, big messes, and like the time he got impatient and he opened a tomato juice carton by stabbing it with a knife. He often woke his host up at 4 a.m. and said, "My brain is open," and that meant he was ready to do math. He wanted to do math about 19 hours a day, every single day. 19 hours times 7 days a week, 133 hours a week. One time when he was a young man, he broke a rule that got him in big trouble. He climbed over a fence to look at a radio tower. He got arrested. The police thought he was a spy. The FBI thought he was a spy. So they spied on him for years after that. Why did friends all over the world put up with him and take care of him? Call him Uncle Paul and love him? Here's where he got arrested. FBI defeats spy scare, 3 aliens. Because Paul Erdos was a genius, and he shared his brain, and he helped people with their math problems, and he gave them more problems to do. Plus, he was a math matchmaker. He introduced mathematicians all over the world to one another so they could work together. Paul knew that mathematician plus mathematician plus mathematician equals more and better math. Paul and his friends did so much great math. They worked in math called number theory, combinatorics, the probabilistic method, and set theory. Paul showed his friends how to do math in new and better ways, and he even started some new kinds of math. Some of the math that Paul and his friends worked on gave us better computers and better search engines on the computer, also better codes for the spies to use. Uncle Paul was generous with his brain and his money too. Whatever money he had, he gave it away. He gave it to poor people, and he offered his prize money for unsolved math problems. Even when Paul got very old, he still did math. He did math while he was playing chess. He did math while he drank coffee, lots and lots of coffee. And he thought about math while he played ping pong with his best friends. Paul said he never wanted to stop doing math, and he didn't. To stop doing math, Paul said, was to die. So Paul left his world while he was at a math meeting. All over the world, mathematicians still talk about and love Uncle Paul. Even people who've never met him, they talk about their Erdos number. If you did math with Paul, you'd get an Erdos number of 1. If you work with someone who worked with Paul, you'd get an Erdos number of 2. People are so proud of their Erdos numbers. Wow, there he is. A long time ago, there was a boy who loved math, and numbers were his best friends. And he grew up to be a man who loved math, and numbers and people were his best friends. Paul Erdos had no problem with that.